My name is Catherine, and I thought I'd seen the worst life had to offer. I was wrong. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The farmhouse in rural Vermont had been my sanctuary for the past 2 years, until it became my prison. A sprawling colonial that once belonged to my late husband's family, now occupied by my eldest son, Ethan, and his wife, Isabella. They'd moved in after Jonathan died, claiming they needed to help me through the transition. What they really needed was free childcare for their twin boys and someone to maintain their lifestyle while they climbed their respective corporate ladders. I should have seen the signs earlier. The way Isabella would introduce me to her friends as Ethan's mother who lives with us, never mentioning that this was my house, inherited from my husband's estate. The way Ethan would ask me to tidy up before his colleagues came over, as if I were staff rather than the woman who'd mortgaged her future to pay for his MBA. The way they'd discuss household expenses in front of me, debating whether to keep me on as if I were an employee whose contract was up for renewal. But I stayed. God help me, I stayed because I thought family meant something. Because I believed that love, even unrequited love, had value. Because I was still clinging to the fantasy that my children would eventually recognize my sacrifices and treat me with the respect I'd earned. The morning of Thanksgiving dawned crisp and golden. The Vermont countryside painted in shades of amber and rust. I'd been up since 4 a.m. preparing for our traditional family feast. A 20-pound turkey stuffed with my grandmother's sage dressing. Homemade cranberry sauce from berries I'd picked myself. Sweet potato casserole topped with pecans from our own trees. Isabella had insisted on hosting Ethan's IT colleagues and their families, turning our intimate family tradition into a professional networking opportunity. Mom, don't forget the house needs to look perfect, Ethan said over coffee, barely glancing up from his laptop. Mr. Richardson is coming. He's the CTO I've been trying to impress. This could make or break my promotion to senior developer. I nodded, swallowing the familiar bitter taste. Of course, sweetheart. Everything will be ready. Isabella swept into the kitchen wearing a cashmere sweater that cost more than most people's monthly groceries. Catherine, I've set out some cleaning supplies in the mudroom. The baseboards in the dining room look dusty, and there are fingerprints on the French doors. Oh, and please make sure you're discreet today. Ethan's colleagues don't need to know about our living arrangement. Discreet. As if my presence in my own home was somehow shameful. I spent the morning cleaning rooms that were already spotless, preparing food I wouldn't be invited to eat with the guests, and listening to Isabella bark orders like I was her personal servant. Ethan disappeared to his home office claiming urgent code reviews, leaving me to transform our farmhouse into the perfect backdrop for his professional theatre. By 3 p.m, the house gleamed. Crystal glasses caught the light from the antique chandelier Jonathan had restored for our 20th anniversary. The dining room table, set with my grandmother's china, looked like something from Country Living magazine. The scent of fresh herbs from my garden mixed with the aroma of roasting turkey filled the air with the promise of a perfect Thanksgiving. The guests began arriving around 4. I watched from the kitchen window as expensive SUVs pulled into our gravel drive. Distinguished men in perfectly pressed casual wear and women wrapped in designer scarves that probably cost more than I'd spent on clothes in the past year. These were Ethan's people now. The tech elite he'd joined when he'd decided his mother's small-town background was something to hide rather than honor. I stayed in the kitchen, arranging appetizers and filling wine glasses that Isabella would carry out as if she'd prepared everything herself. Through the serving window, I could see Ethan holding court in the living room, animated and confident as he discussed his latest software innovations. He looked so much like his father at that age. Before the farming accident, before the medical bills mounted, before the heart attack claimed Jonathan at 57. Catherine. Isabella's voice cut through my thoughts. We need more of those butternut squash tartlets. And the mulled cider is running low. I nodded and returned to my tasks, invisible and efficient. This was my role now, the ghost in the machine, keeping everything running smoothly while others took the credit and the glory. Around 6 p.m, a man I didn't recognize approached the kitchen. He was older than most of the other guests, probably in his early 60s, with salt and pepper hair and intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. "Excuse me," he said, his voice warm but professional. "I'm looking for the restroom." "Down the hall, second door on the left," I replied, not looking up from the gravy I was whisking. He didn't move immediately. You know, I have to say, this is extraordinary food. Did Isabella make all of this herself? Something in his tone made me glance up. There was a knowing quality to his question, as if he already suspected the answer. No, I said quietly. I did. He nodded slowly. I thought so. She doesn't strike me as someone who grows her own herbs. I'm James Richardson, by the way. My hands stilled on the whisk. This was Ethan's boss, the CTO who could make or break his career. And here I was, meeting him while wearing an apron and stirring gravy like hired help. Catherine, I said, wiping my hands on my apron. Ethan's mother. Ah, his expression shifted, becoming more thoughtful. I see. Well, Catherine, you should know that your cooking rivals the finest restaurants in Burlington. Ethan is incredibly fortunate to have such culinary talent in the family. Before I could respond, Ethan's voice boomed from the dining room. Mr. Richardson, there you are. I was just telling everyone about the new algorithm we deployed last quarter. Mr. Richardson glanced toward the dining room, then back at me. It was lovely meeting you, Catherine. I have a feeling we'll speak again soon. He left me standing there, confused by the cryptic comment but too focused on dinner service to dwell on it. The evening was just beginning, and I had a feast for 20 people to coordinate. It was nearly 11 when the last guest finally left, their voices carrying across the crisp November air as they praised the incredible feast Isabella had provided. Isabella had disappeared upstairs an hour earlier, claiming a headache, leaving me to restore the house to its usual pristine state. Ethan lingered in the living room, loosening his tie and pouring himself a generous glass of the bourbon Jonathan had collected. Good evening, he said, not looking at me as I collected empty glasses. I think Mr. Richardson was impressed. That's wonderful, I replied, my voice carefully neutral. He took a long sip of his drink. You know, Mom, Isabella and I have been talking about the future, about our plans. Something in his tone made me stop what I was doing. What kind of plans? Well, the boys are getting older. They'll be starting kindergarten next year. And we won't need as much help around the house. He still wasn't looking at me. We've been thinking it might be time for you to find your own place. Maybe something smaller in town. You could start fresh, meet people your own age. The words hit me like a physical blow. After everything I'd done, everything I'd sacrificed, they were planning to discard me like yesterday's newspaper. This is my house, Ethan, I said quietly. Actually, it's complicated. His voice was careful, measured. Dad left it to me in the will. You have a life estate, but that doesn't mean you have to use it. We think it would be better for everyone if you found somewhere more appropriate. Somewhere you could be independent again. I stared at him, this stranger wearing my son's face, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The love I'd carried for him, the hope I'd nurtured despite years of neglect and casual cruelty, began to crystallize into something harder and infinitely more dangerous. I see, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He finally looked at me then, and for just a moment I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, as if some part of him recognized that he'd just crossed a line there was no coming back from. But it was too late. The damage was done, and the woman who'd spent decades putting everyone else's needs before her own was finally, irrevocably, gone. The next morning brought no apologies, no acknowledgement of the previous night's conversation. Ethan left for his home office early, already absorbed in his laptop screen. Isabella emerged from her bedroom in yoga clothes, already on her phone coordinating her morning Pilates class and lunch plans with friends I'd never been introduced to. Catherine, I'm meeting a client for brunch in Montpellier, she announced without looking up from her screen. The boys need to be at their play date by 10. Don't forget Oliver's EpiPen, it's in the medicine cabinet. I nodded, watching her grab her designer purse and car keys. No, please. No, thank you. No acknowledgement that I'd spent the previous evening serving their guests while they took credit for my work. After she left, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring out at the garden Jonathan and I had planted together 20 years ago. The last of the marigolds were fading, their golden petals scattered across the frost-touched ground like memories of warmer days. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday. But something fundamental had shifted. The scales had fallen from my eyes, and I was seeing my life with brutal clarity for the first time in years. I wasn't a beloved mother being cared for by grateful children. I was free labor, a convenience, a woman whose sacrifices had been forgotten the moment they became inconvenient to remember. The twins, bless them, were the only honest ones in the house. At 5 years old, they had no filter, no social pretenses to maintain. "Grandma Catherine, why don't you live in your own house?" Oliver asked as I helped him with his shoes. "This is my house, sweetheart," I said gently. "But Daddy says it's his house now and you just help take care of it because you're old and don't have anywhere else to go." The words cut deep, not because they came from a child, but because they revealed what Ethan had been telling his sons about me. In their innocent minds, I wasn't their grandmother who loved them. I was a charity case their parents had taken in out of pity. "Daddy says lots of things," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Sometimes adults don't explain things clearly to children." That afternoon, while the boys napped and the house fell into its usual quiet routine, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my lawyer. "Catherine, wonderful to hear from you," said Margaret Sullivan, the family attorney who'd handled Jonathan's estate. "How are you settling in with Ethan and Isabella?" "Actually, Margaret, that's what I'm calling about. I need to understand something about Jonathan's will. Ethan claims the house belongs to him now." There was a pause. "Well, technically, he inherited the property, but you have a life estate. That means you have the right to live there for the rest of your life. He can't force you out, Catherine." "Did he suggest otherwise?" "He thinks it would be better if I found somewhere else to live." Margaret's voice sharpened. "That's his opinion, not his legal right. You own that house as much as he does until the day you die. Don't let anyone tell you differently." After hanging up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months' power. Ethan had tried to manipulate me into giving up my rights, banking on my ignorance of the law. The battered mother in me might have been hurt by this betrayal. The woman I was becoming felt only cold satisfaction. If my son wanted to play games, I was about to show him how they were really won. The opportunity came sooner than I'd expected. 5 days later, Isabella announced they were hosting another dinner party, this time for the holidays. The guest list would be smaller but more exclusive senior executives from Ethan's company, Isabella's book club friends, and a few couples from their country club. "We'll need the full treatment," Isabella said, scrolling through her phone as she gave me my orders. "Cocktail hour, seated dinner and dessert. I'm thinking something elegant but seasonal. You know, the kind of thing that shows we have sophisticated taste." "Of course," I said, already planning. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. I ordered flowers from the local greenhouse, planned an ambitious menu, and transformed the house into a showcase worthy of Vermont Living magazine. Isabella took credit for everything, of course posting photos on social media of the holiday entertaining that consisted entirely of pointing at arrangements I'd made and nodding approvingly. The night of the party, I outdid myself. The table setting was perfection, my grandmother's china. Crystal glasses that caught the candlelight, silver that gleamed like mirrors. The menu was ambitious roasted duck with cherry glaze, root vegetables from my garden, and a chocolate tart that required precise timing. Everything designed to impress Ethan's colleagues and reinforce his image as a man who had everything under control. I wore my best navy dress. Not designer like Isabella's wardrobe, but well cut and appropriate. I'd done my hair and makeup carefully, wanting to look like the lady of the house I actually was, not the hired help I'd been relegated to playing. The guests arrived at 7 sharp. I recognized several faces from Thanksgiving, including James Richardson, who greeted me with that same knowing smile. The others were new, more senior executives, their wives dressed in understated luxury, the kind of people who saw success as a natural state rather than something to be earned. I served cocktails in the living room, moving efficiently between guests, refilling glasses and offering canapes. The conversation flowed around me as if I were invisible stock options. Vacation homes, complaints about their children's expensive private schools. These people lived in a bubble so complete they couldn't see beyond their own reflected prosperity. "Ethan, you must give me the name of your caterer," gushed Mrs. Patterson, the wife of the company president. "These appetizers are incredible." Ethan beamed, accepting the compliment as if he'd prepared them himself. "Oh, we have our sauces." He caught my eye across the room and winked as if we were sharing some private joke, as if I were complicit in his deception. That's when James Richardson approached me near the kitchen doorway. "Catherine," he said quietly, "I have to ask, are you by any chance the same Catherine who used to run Catherine's Management Solutions?" The question hit me like lightning. I hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. Catherine's Management Solutions, the consulting firm I'd built from nothing while working nights and weekends. The business that had made Jonathan and me wealthy enough to buy this farmhouse, to send our children to college, to live the life Ethan now took for granted. Yes, I stammered. That was a long time ago. Not so long, Richardson said, his eyes sharp with interest. 12 years, maybe? I remember when you sold to Brennan Corp. Brilliant restructuring work. You walked away with what, 28 million? The number hung in the air between us. 28.5 million, actually, but who was counting? Money I'd invested wisely. Money that had grown substantially over the years. Money that Ethan knew nothing about because I'd kept my finances private after Jonathan's death. I'm sorry, Richardson continued, but I have to ask, what are you doing serving drinks at your son's dinner party? Before I could answer, Ethan appeared beside us, slightly flushed from wine and success. Mr. Richardson, I hope you're enjoying yourself. The food is incredible, isn't it? Indeed it is, Richardson replied, his tone carefully neutral. I was just speaking with Catherine about her former business. Ethan's smile faltered slightly. Oh, Mom's little consulting thing? That was years ago. Ancient history. 28 million isn't exactly ancient history, Richardson said quietly. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Ethan's face went white, then red, then white again. Around us, conversations continued, but I could feel the shift in atmosphere. The way power dynamics were suddenly rearranging themselves. I'm sorry, what? Ethan managed. Richardson looked between us, clearly realizing he'd stumbled into something complicated. Your mother built one of the most successful management consulting firms in New England. When she sold it, she walked away with enough money to retire comfortably for several lifetimes. Ethan turned to look at me, his expression a mixture of shock, confusion, and something that might have been fear. For the first time in years, he was seeing me, not as the faded woman who cooked his meals, but as someone with resources, with options, with power he'd never imagined. Mom, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something cold and calculating settle in my chest. No love, no anger, no disappointment. Just a clear-eyed assessment of a man who had systematically destroyed every bond between us through his own selfishness and cruelty. We'll talk later, I said calmly, then turned and walked back toward the kitchen. Behind me, I could hear Richardson's voice, carefully controlled but audible to anyone listening. Ethan, I think there might be some things about your family that you don't fully understand. The evening was about to become very interesting indeed. I retreated to the kitchen, my hands steady as I put the finishing touches on the roasted duck. Through the serving window, I could see Ethan huddled with Richardson, their conversation intense and whispered. Isabella had noticed the tension and was making her way over, her smile bright, but her eyes sharp with the instincts of someone who sensed opportunity or threat. The dining room buzzed with anticipation as guests took their seats. I'd arranged the seating carefully, Richardson at Ethan's right hand, Isabella holding court at the opposite end. I served each course with mechanical precision, invisible again now that the moment of revelation had passed. But I could feel eyes on me, whispered conversations that stopped when I approached tables, the electric undercurrent of gossip beginning to flow. Catherine, dear, Mrs. Patterson called out as I refilled her wineglass. James was telling us the most fascinating story about a consulting firm. Didn't you used to work in that field? The question was loaded with false sweetness, the tone wealthy women used when they were fishing for information they could later weaponize at country club brunches. I did, I replied simply, not elaborating. How exciting. What kind of consulting? Before I could answer, Ethan's voice cut across the table, loud enough for everyone to hear. His face was flushed with wine and embarrassment, his voice carrying that particular edge men get when they feel their authority being questioned. Oh, Mom had a little business helping small companies with their operations. Nothing too sophisticated, mostly filing systems and basic organization stuff. She was always good with keeping things tidy. The dismissal was so casual, so complete, that several guests exchanged glances. Richardson's expression darkened, but he said nothing. I felt every conversation in the room pause, waiting to see how I would respond to being reduced to a filing clerk at my own dinner table. I smiled and continued pouring wine. How thoughtful that you remember, I said mildly. But Ethan wasn't finished. The wine had loosened his tongue, and perhaps Richardson's earlier questions had rattled him more than I'd realized. He seemed determined to reassert control over the narrative, to put me back in the box where he needed me to stay. Actually, he continued, his voice getting louder, Since we're all being so honest tonight, I should probably clarify something about our household arrangements. Isabella's face went pale. She knew Ethan well enough to recognize when he was about to say something catastrophically stupid. "Ethan," she warned quietly, but he waved her off. No, it's fine. These are friends." He gestured expansively around the table. "The thing is, Mom doesn't actually live here in the traditional sense. We took her in after Dad died because, well, she didn't have anywhere else to go. It's more of a caregiving situation." The silence that followed was deafening. Forks paused halfway to mouths, wine glasses froze in midair. I could practically hear the social calculations being made. Who was lying? Who was deluded? What was the real story behind this increasingly bizarre dinner party? Richardson cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, Ethan, but I think there might be some confusion." "No confusion at all." Ethan interrupted, emboldened by what he mistook for support. "Mom helps around the house. She's actually quite good at it. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. We let her stay because, well, what else was she going to do at her age? It works out for everyone." He paused, then delivered the words that would seal his fate. "Think of her as our live-in help. We keep her around out of kindness." The words hit the room like a physical slap. Mrs. Patterson gasped audibly. Two of the other wives looked horrified. The men shifted uncomfortably in their seats, recognizing cruelty even when it was dressed up as charity. But Ethan wasn't done. Drunk on wine and what he imagined was his own cleverness. He turned to Richardson with a conspiratorial grin. "I mean, Mr. Richardson, you understand how it is with elderly relatives. Sometimes you have to be creative about managing their expectations. Mom's got some interesting ideas about her past accomplishments, but we've learned it's easier to just let her have her little fantasies." The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Richardson set down his wine glass with deliberate care, his face a mask of controlled disgust. "Ethan," he said quietly, "are you absolutely certain that's how you want to characterize your mother?" "Of course, I mean, look at her. Does she look like someone who built a multi-million-dollar company?" Ethan laughed, the sound ugly and harsh in the elegant dining room. "Come on, Mr. Richardson. You of all people should be able to spot the difference between successful business people and, well, domestic help." That's when Richardson's expression shifted from disgust to something much more dangerous. He looked at me standing in the doorway to the kitchen, serving spoons still in my hand, and I saw recognition dawn in his eyes. Not just recognition of who I was, but understanding of what I'd endured, what I'd allowed to happen, and what I was capable of in response. "Actually, Ethan," Richardson said, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had made him CTO of one of Vermont's most successful tech companies. "I know exactly who your mother is. The question is, do you?" He turned to address the entire table, his voice clear and carrying. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Catherine, founder and former CEO of Catherine's Management Solutions, one of the most successful management consulting firms in New England. When she sold her company 12 years ago, the purchase price was $28 million. She employed over 150 people and had clients ranging from Fortune 500 companies to state government agencies." The revelation hit the room like a bomb. Forks clattered against plates. Someone's wine glass tipped over, sending red liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like spilled secrets. "Catherine," Richardson continued, never taking his eyes off Ethan's increasingly horrified face, "revolutionized supply chain management for manufacturing companies across the Northeast. She holds 3 patents for logistics software that are still generating royalties today. She's been featured in Harvard Business Review and Inc. magazine." Ethan's face had gone from red to white to green. His mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. "But perhaps most relevant to tonight," Richardson said, his voice gaining strength, "is that Catherine is worth approximately $52 million, making her one of the wealthiest women in Vermont. Wealthy enough to buy your entire company several times over." Isabella made a small choked sound. Around the table, guests stared at me with expressions ranging from shock to awe to barely concealed calculation. The social dynamics of the evening had just been completely reversed. "Now, Ethan," Richardson continued, his tone conversational but deadly, "would you like to reconsider your characterization of your mother as domestic help, who lives here out of charity?" Ethan looked at me, his eyes wide with panic and dawning comprehension. For the first time in years, he was seeing me clearly, not as the broken woman he'd convinced himself I was, but as the force of nature I'd always been. The woman who'd built an empire while he was learning to code. The woman who could destroy his career, his marriage, his entire life with a single phone call. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't. I walked slowly around the table until I stood directly behind his chair. The room was so quiet I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the soft rustle of expensive fabric as guests leaned forward to catch every word. "Just what, Ethan?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm. "Just lying to your colleagues about who I am? Just telling your children that their grandmother is a charity case? Just trying to convince me to give up my legal rights to my own home?" His shoulders shook. Actual tears were forming in his eyes, not tears of remorse, but tears of fear. Fear of exposure, fear of consequences, fear of the woman he'd systematically underestimated and abused. "Please," he whispered so quietly only I could hear. "Please don't do this. Not here, not in front of them." I leaned down until my mouth was next to his ear, close enough that my words would be for him alone. "You want to know what kindness looks like, Ethan?" I whispered. "Kindness is what I showed you for 2 years when I still thought there might be something left of the son I raised. But kindness has its limits, and you just reached mine." I straightened up and addressed the table, my voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm afraid dinner is over." The guests began to murmur, gathering their things with the practiced efficiency of people who recognized a social disaster unfolding. Richardson lingered, catching my eye with a nod of unmistakable respect. As the last guest filed out, I turned to look at Ethan and Isabella, both pale and shaking in their chairs. "We need to talk," I said simply. And for the first time in 2 years, they listened. The house felt different after the last guest left. The same walls, the same furniture, but the power structure had fundamentally shifted. Ethan and Isabella sat at the dining table like defendants awaiting sentencing while I moved methodically around the room, blowing out candles and stacking plates with the same calm efficiency I'd shown all evening. "Mom, please." Ethan finally broke the silence, his voice pleading. "Let me explain." "Explain what?" I didn't look up from collecting the crystal glasses. "Explain how you've been taking advantage of me for 2 years while telling people I'm your charity case. Explain how you've poisoned your own children against me. Or perhaps you'd like to explain how you plan to steal my house by lying about my rights." Isabella shifted in her chair, her designer dress wrinkled, her makeup smeared. "Catherine, you have to understand our position. Ethan's career. Ethan's career." I finally looked at her, and she flinched at what she saw in my eyes. "Yes, let's talk about Ethan's career. The career that was launched with money from my business. The graduate school tuition I paid. The down payment on his first apartment. The wedding expenses. The country club membership that helped him network into his current position. Should I continue?" That was what parents do," Ethan stammered. "You wanted to help." I did want to help. Past tense. I set the stack of plates down carefully, each movement precise and controlled. But helping your child succeed and being exploited by them are 2 very different things. I walked to the antique sideboard and poured myself a glass of the wine Jonathan had been saving for special occasions. Wine that Ethan had been drinking freely, never thinking to ask permission. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, settling into the armchair that had been Jonathan's favorite. "Tomorrow morning you're going to start looking for a new place to live. I'm giving you 60 days to find something suitable and move out." "You can't do that," Isabella shot to her feet. "This is our home, the boys' school, our friends, everything is here." "This was never your home." "It's my home, which I generously allowed you to live in while you were supposedly helping me through my grief. That arrangement is now terminated." Ethan's face crumpled. "Mom, please. If you kick us out, how will it look? My reputation, my standing at the company." "Your reputation?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Ethan, by tomorrow morning, everyone at your company will know exactly what happened here tonight. Richardson won't keep this to himself. Men like him don't stay silent when they witness something this revealing." The truth of that statement hit him like a physical blow. His career, which he'd sacrificed our relationship to protect, was already damaged. The humiliation he'd tried to impose on me had rebounded onto him with devastating force. "There has to be something we can do," Isabella said, desperation creeping into her voice. "Some way to fix this." "Fix this?" I repeated the words slowly as if tasting them. Isabella, what exactly do you think needs to be fixed? The fact that you've been living off my generosity while treating me like hired help? The fact that your husband publicly humiliated his own mother to impress his boss? Or the fact that you've spent 2 years planning to push me out of my own home? She had no answer for that. Let me make something very clear, I continued, my voice steady but firm. I believe in consequences. I believe in teaching people that actions have results. But I also believe in second chances for those who earn them. Over the next hour, I laid out the new reality with the same methodical precision I'd once used to restructure failing companies. They would leave my house within 60 days. Ethan would need to rebuild his professional reputation from scratch. They would receive limited financial assistance from me, enough to get settled, but not enough to maintain their current lifestyle. But the boys, Ethan pleaded. They're your grandchildren. You can't punish them for our mistakes. The boys I love dearly despite what you've taught them to think about me, I said firmly. Oliver and Nathan will always have a place in my life and in my will. But that relationship will be on my terms now, not yours. Isabella tried a different approach. Catherine, you're obviously upset, and you have every right to be. But think about what this will do to the family. Jonathan wouldn't have wanted this kind of division. Don't. The word came out sharp and clear. Don't you dare invoke my husband's name. Jonathan would be disappointed in what his son has become. He would be heartbroken by the way you've treated the woman he loved. I stood up, smoothing down my dress with the same careful attention to detail I'd shown all evening. This conversation is over. You have 60 days, and that's more generous than you deserve. As I walked toward the stairs, Ethan called out one last desperate plea. Mom, what if we apologize? What if we make this right somehow? I paused at the foot of the staircase and turned back to look at him. This man who had once been my baby, my firstborn. The child I'd dreamed of while Jonathan and I planned our future together. The child I'd sacrificed for, worked for, loved unconditionally even when that love wasn't returned. Now I felt something different. Not the cold emptiness I'd expected, but a complex mix of disappointment, determination, and something that might have been hope. Ethan, I said quietly, some things can be forgiven. Some relationships can be rebuilt, but it takes genuine remorse, real change, and a lot of hard work. The question is whether you're capable of any of those things. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom in my house, bought with my money, and closed the door behind me. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I could breathe again. The next morning, I woke before dawn and made my first phone call to Margaret Sullivan, my lawyer. The second call went to my financial advisor. The third to a private investigator I'd used occasionally for business purposes back in my consulting days. By the time Ethan and Isabella came downstairs, still shell-shocked from the previous evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of legal documents. What's all this? Isabella asked wearily. Protection, I replied. Ethan, I've had Margaret research your employment situation. Apparently, your company has very strict policies about employee conduct that could reflect poorly on the firm's reputation. Ethan went pale. You wouldn't. I also had an interesting conversation with my investigator about your financial situation. Did you know it's possible to trace every penny you've spent in the last 2 years? Every dinner charged to the credit cards I co-signed for, every vacation paid for with the allowance I provided, every designer purchase made with money you claimed was for household expenses. Isabella's face went white. That's legal. You gave us access to those accounts. I gave you access for legitimate household expenses and emergencies, not for maintaining a lifestyle you couldn't afford on your own salaries. I sipped my coffee calmly. Misuse of funds is a serious matter. You're trying to scare us, Ethan said, but his voice shook. I slid a folder across the table. Credit card statements, bank records, receipts. $18,000 in the last 6 months alone, spent on everything from spa treatments to golf club memberships. All documented, all traceable, all ethically questionable given the terms of our arrangement. They stared at the documents like they were ticking bombs. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice businesslike. You're going to leave my house quietly and with dignity. You're not going to contact the media. You're not going to badmouth me to anyone, and you're not going to use my grandchildren as emotional leverage. In return, I won't pursue legal action, and I won't make sure these documents find their way to your HR department. And if we don't agree? Isabella asked, though we all knew she already knew the answer. I smiled, and for the first time in years it felt genuine. Then you'll discover that a successful businesswoman who's had 12 years to plan can be very thorough when she needs to be. Ethan looked at his wife, then back at me. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I've had 2 years to think about it, Ethan. 2 years of being treated like a servant in my own home while you plan to push me out. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? Did you honestly believe I was the helpless old woman you convinced yourself I was? He had no answer for that. Neither of them did. 59 days, I said, gathering up the documents. I suggest you start planning. As I walked out of the kitchen, I heard Isabella begin to cry, soft. Desperate sobs that might have moved me once upon a time when I still believed family bonds were sacred and love could overcome any betrayal. But that woman was gone, and the woman who had taken her place felt only a quiet satisfaction at the sound of her daughter-in-law's tears. 2 months later, I stood in my living room watching the moving truck pull away from our gravel drive. Ethan and Isabella's departure had been as efficient and drama-free as I'd demanded. No theatrical scenes, no last-minute pleas for forgiveness, no emotional farewells with the grandchildren they'd tried to turn against me. Just boxes, furniture, and the quiet sound of a house finally returning to its rightful owner. The boys had been confused, of course. 5-year-olds don't understand the complex dynamics of adult relationships. They only knew their grandmother had suddenly become someone who set strict boundaries instead of endless forgiveness. Ethan had tried to use their confusion as a final manipulation, suggesting I was punishing innocent children for their parents' mistakes. I felt sadness watching their confusion, but also determination. Oliver and Nathan were learning important lessons about respect, consequences, and the difference between love and enabling. These were lessons that would serve them well in life. The house felt different now, lighter. The oppressive weight of resentment and exploitation had lifted, leaving behind only space and possibility. I walked through each room methodically, reclaiming territories that had been occupied by people who saw me as an inconvenience to be managed. In Ethan's former office, I found a stack of papers he'd forgotten in his haste to leave job applications, apartment listings, credit reports, the evidence of a life suddenly forced to operate within its actual means. At the bottom of the pile was a letter from his company, dated the previous week. I opened it without hesitation. "Dear Mr. Catherine," it began, "following recent discussions about professional conduct and company values, we have decided to accept your resignation effective immediately. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." So he'd resigned rather than be fired. Smart move. My phone rang as I was filing the letter away. The number was local but unfamiliar. "Mrs. Catherine, this is Jennifer Walsh from the Rutland Herald. We've heard some interesting stories about a dinner party incident, and we'd love to get your perspective on family dynamics and elder care issues." I smiled into the phone. "I'm sorry, but I don't give interviews about personal matters. However, you might want to speak with James Richardson about corporate responsibility and treating employees' families with respect. I believe he has some very interesting perspectives on professional ethics." After hanging up, I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into Jonathan's favourite chair. The local paper would run something. They always did when it involved prominent families learning hard lessons. But the story would focus on the positive aspects, the importance of respecting elders, the value of honest communication, and the possibility of rebuilding damaged relationships. Over the following weeks, I received a series of calls that confirmed everything was proceeding as I'd hoped. Margaret Sullivan called to inform me that Ethan had found a modest apartment in Burlington and was looking for a new position. My financial advisor reported that the accounts I'd closed had been replaced with a trust fund for the boys' education, ensuring they would never suffer for their parents' mistakes. The private investigator had the most encouraging update. "They've enrolled the boys in a good public school," he reported. "Mrs. Catherine, Isabella has taken a part-time job at a local marketing firm. Mr. Catherine is doing freelance programming work. From what I can observe, they're learning to live within their means, and the children seem to be adjusting well to their new circumstances." I felt a flicker of something that might have been pride. They were learning, growing, taking responsibility for their choices. That was more than I dared hope for. "Thank you for the update," I said. "I won't be needing your services anymore." 3 weeks after they left, Isabella called. "I'd been expecting it." "Catherine, please," she said, her voice calmer than I'd heard it in years. "The boys are asking about you. They miss their grandmother. They want to know when they can see you again. They can see me when you and Ethan demonstrate that you understand what went wrong and what needs to change. I replied carefully. We've been talking about that. A lot. Her voice was quiet, thoughtful. We know we treated you terribly. We took advantage of your kindness and your love for us. We turned your generosity into a weapon against you. I listened, waiting. Ethan wants to apologize, really apologize, not just because he's scared of the consequences, but because he's realized what he lost. What we all lost. And what did you lose, Isabella? There was a long pause. We lost you. We lost the woman who built an empire and chose to share it with us. We lost the grandmother who would have given those boys everything. And we threw it away for pride and convenience. For the first time in years, I heard genuine remorse in her voice. Actions have consequences, Isabella, but they also have the potential for redemption. If you and Ethan are serious about change, if you're willing to do the hard work of rebuilding trust, then we can talk about the boys visiting. We are, she said quickly. We're both in counseling. We're learning to manage our finances properly. Ethan is working hard to rebuild his reputation. We want to be the kind of people who deserve to be in your life. Then we'll start slowly. Sunday dinners, perhaps. Here in my home, under my rules. The boys are always welcome, but you and Ethan will need to earn that privilege back. She was crying now, but they were different tears. Tears of relief, of hope, of genuine gratitude. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you for not giving up on us completely. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen preparing Sunday dinner for 6. Oliver and Nathan were in the garden, helping me harvest the last of the fall vegetables, their laughter carrying through the crisp November air. Ethan was setting the dining room table with careful attention to detail, while Isabella arranged flowers I'd grown myself. The dynamic was different now. I was clearly the matriarch, the one whose home we gathered in, whose rules we followed, whose approval mattered. But it was a healthy dynamic, built on respect rather than exploitation, on earned trust rather than assumed obligation. Grandma Catherine, Oliver called from the garden, can we help you cook? Of course, sweetheart, I called back. Wash your hands first. Ethan appeared in the kitchen doorway, flour dusting his apron. He'd been learning to bake, one of many small steps toward becoming a more contributing member of our rebuilt family. The rolls are ready to go in the oven, he said quietly. And Mom, thank you. For giving us this chance, I looked at him, this man who was slowly becoming the son I'd hoped he could be, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine maternal pride. You're earning it, I said simply. Every week you're earning it. As we sat down to dinner, I raised my glass of cider and a toast. To second chances, I said. And to the family we're building together. To Grandma Catherine, Oliver piped up, who makes the best everything. I laughed, really laughed for the first time in years. Around the table, my family, my complicated, imperfect, but finally honest family, laughed with me. Outside, the Vermont mountains blazed with autumn colors, and inside, we were warm and together and learning, every day, how to love each other better. Not perfect, not without boundaries, not without consequences, but real and growing and filled with the kind of hope that only comes from rebuilding something broken into something stronger, the way it should be.